I never meant to avoid her. That's the lie I tell myself every morning when I check the time, wait for the sound of her door, and then delay stepping outside by exactly 3 minutes. Long enough for her to leave. Long enough to keep the past quiet. She lives 3 doors down, close enough that I can hear her laugh through open windows, close enough that I still know the rhythm of her footsteps on the stairs. For years, she was the one person I didn't need to prepare myself for. Now she's the one face I can't look at without feeling like something inside me is tearing open again. The first time I realized I was avoiding her was the morning she waved, and I pretended to be on my phone. The second time was when she said my name, softly, like she used to, and I crossed the street. By the third time, the guilt was heavier than the grief. But pain has a strange way of choosing survival over honesty. Her name is Aisha. It always has been. It always will be. She moved in next door when we were both still young enough to believe life would follow simple rules. We shared borrowed sugar, late-night conversations on the steps, secrets whispered when the power went out. She knew my dreams before I knew how fragile they were. And I knew her smile before I understood how easily it could disappear. The night everything changed wasn't dramatic. No storm. No screaming. Just a quiet moment that rearranged the rest of my life. She stood there, under the yellow hallway light, telling me she was leaving. Marriage. Another city. Another future. She said it gently, like she was apologizing for the weather. I smiled because that's what people do when their hearts are breaking silently. I told her I was happy for her. That lie tasted like metal in my mouth. After she left, the house next door felt haunted. Even when someone else moved in, I still heard her voice. And when she came back years later, alone, quieter, carrying pain she didn't explain, I knew I wasn't healed enough to face her. Avoiding her became easier than admitting that seeing her reminded me of everything I never said. Weeks passed. Then months. Until one evening, as I fumbled with my keys, I heard her behind me. "Why do you keep avoiding me?" she asked. Not angry. Just tired. I froze. Every excuse I had practiced vanished. I turned slowly, met her eyes for the first time in years, and said the only truth I had left. "Because looking at you hurts." The silence that followed was louder than any argument. And in that moment, I realized some wounds don't bleed, but they still hurt like hell. She didn't step back when I said it. That surprised me. Most people retreat when they hear pain they don't know how to fix. Aisha didn't. She inhaled slowly, like she was bracing herself against a wave she already knew was coming. The hallway light flickered, and for a split second, she looked exactly like she used to, eyes full of things unsaid, lips trembling with words she wasn't sure she was allowed to speak anymore. "I was hoping you'd say anything else," she whispered. Anger. Blame. Even indifference. I wanted to tell her that indifference would have been mercy. But instead, I stayed quiet. She leaned against the wall, the same wall we once sat beside at midnight, planning futures that never happened. "Do you know what hurts?" she continued, coming back here and realizing the only person who ever really saw me can't even look at me anymore. That's when the guilt finally cracked through my defenses. I told her how every time I saw her, I remembered the life I thought we'd have. How her absence taught me how quiet love can die without anyone noticing. How her return reopened wounds I pretended had scarred over. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she nodded slowly. "I left because I was afraid," she said. "I came back because I was broken." That sentence sat between us like unfinished business. She told me about the marriage that felt like a promise and became a cage. About the nights she stared at the ceiling, wondering what would have happened if she'd stayed. I told her about the years I spent moving on without ever really moving forward. We laughed once, briefly, at how cruel timing can be. Then she said something that changed everything. "I don't want what we were," she said. "I just don't want to be strangers who pretend we don't feel anything." I looked at her then. Really looked. And for the first time, the pain didn't make me want to run. It made me want to breathe. Healing didn't happen that night. Love didn't magically return. But honesty did. And sometimes, that's the beginning of something quieter, stronger, and real. As I unlocked my door, she smiled, soft, grateful. "Thank you for finally telling me the truth," she said. I nodded. Because avoiding her had been easier, but facing her was finally setting me free. If this story touched your heart, don't scroll away. Subscribe to the channel. More real, emotional stories are coming, and you won't want to miss what happens next. After that night, avoiding her was no longer an option, but neither was pretending everything was fine. The days that followed felt strangely unbalanced, like my life had shifted an inch to the left and never quite settled back. I'd see her sometimes, watering the plants outside her door, standing at the balcony, walking past with a quiet nod that carried more meaning than a conversation ever could. Every glance felt like reopening a book I had closed halfway through years ago. I told myself that honesty had freed me, but freedom didn't feel light. It felt raw. Nights became the hardest. Memories didn't come gently, they arrived uninvited, loud and vivid. The way she used to laugh when she was nervous. The way she'd sit beside me without saying anything when words felt unnecessary. I realized avoiding her hadn't been about anger or resentment, it had been about survival. Seeing her again forced me to confront a truth I'd buried. I never stopped caring, I just learned how to live with the ache. One evening, as rain drummed softly against the windows, there was a knock on my door. I already knew it was her before I opened it. She stood there, holding 2 cups of tea, hands slightly shaking. "I'm not here to complicate your life," she said quietly. I didn't want another day to pass without trying. We sat across from each other, the space between us filled with everything we hadn't said yet. She told me she was learning how to be alone again, how silence could be both terrifying and healing. I told her I was afraid that letting her back into my life, even as a friend, might reopen wounds I barely learned to manage. She nodded, eyes glossy but steady. "Pain doesn't disappear when you ignore it," she said. "It just waits." That line hit harder than anything else. When she left that night, I didn't feel closure. I felt something more dangerous, hope. And hope, when mixed with old love, can either heal you, or break you all over again. Weeks passed, and something unexpected happened. The pain didn't grow, it softened. Not vanished, not forgotten, but reshaped. Aisha and I began talking again, carefully, like people walking barefoot over broken glass. We didn't revisit the past unless it demanded attention. We spoke about small things, work, books, sleepless nights. Yet beneath every normal conversation ran an undercurrent of emotion neither of us could ignore. One afternoon, she confessed, "I thought coming back here would destroy me." She smiled faintly. "But it's teaching me how to forgive myself." I realized then that I wasn't the only one who had been hurting all these years. We were both carrying versions of regret that looked different but weighed the same. One night, sitting on the same steps where we once dreamed too loudly, she asked, "Do you think some people are meant to meet twice?" I didn't answer immediately. I thought about how love doesn't always mean reunion, and how healing doesn't always mean letting go completely. I said slowly, some people meet to teach us how deeply we can feel, and some come back to teach us how to live with it. She didn't cry. Neither did I. Instead, there was peace in that silence. Looking at her no longer hurt the way it used to. It still ached, but now the ache felt honest, bearable, human. Avoiding her had protected me once, but facing her had given me something I didn't know I needed: closure without bitterness, connection without expectation. As I watched her walk back to her door, I understood something clearly for the first time. Healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about learning how to carry it without letting it crush you. And sometimes, the people who hurt us the most are also the ones who help us finally heal, just when I thought we had found a fragile balance, life did what it always does, it tested it. One evening, as I was returning home later than usual, I saw a car parked outside her place that didn't belong to anyone in the building. A man stepped out first. Confident. Familiar in a way that made my stomach tighten. Then Aisha appeared behind him, laughing softly as she locked her door. The sound hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't jealousy exactly, it was the realization that I had quietly started imagining a future where pain stayed behind us, where whatever this was between us could grow into something gentler. I stood frozen, unseen, watching as the man said something that made her smile again. That night, sleep refused to come. Old fears resurfaced, of being the one left behind, of mistaking comfort for possibility. The next day, I avoided her again, slipping back into old habits like muscle memory. When she finally confronted me, her voice wasn't angry. It was hurt. "You promised we wouldn't disappear on each other anymore," she said. I confessed everything then, how seeing her with someone else made me realize I hadn't healed as much as I thought, how I was terrified of hoping again. She listened, eyes filling slowly. Then she said something I didn't expect. "That was my brother," she said quietly. Shame washed over me, followed by relief so sharp it almost hurt. But relief didn't fix what came next. "Do you know why this scared you so much?" she asked. "Because some part of you still believes you're not allowed to want me." That sentence lingered long after she walked away. For the first time, I understood that avoiding her wasn't just about pain, it was about fear of choosing again. The night everything finally came out was silent, almost gentle. No rain. No drama. Just two people sitting across from each other with nothing left to hide. Aisha spoke first. "I don't need promises," she said. "I just need honesty." So I gave it to her. I told her I still cared, that the pain had changed shape but never fully left. I told her I was afraid that if we tried again and failed, it would destroy what little peace I had built. She nodded slowly. "And I'm afraid," she said, "that if we never try, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering." There it was, the truth neither of us had dared to say out loud. We weren't standing at the edge of love, we were standing at the edge of choice. We didn't rush into anything. No dramatic confessions. No sweeping declarations. Just a decision to stop running. To allow presence instead of avoidance. As days passed, something remarkable happened. Looking at her no longer hurt. Not because the past vanished, but because it no longer owned me. We laughed again, real laughter, not the careful kind. Sometimes we sat in silence, and it felt safe. Maybe we wouldn't end up together forever. Maybe we would. But for the first time, that uncertainty didn't scare me. Healing hadn't meant forgetting her, it meant forgiving myself for feeling. The last time she asked, "Why did you keep avoiding me?" I answered honestly. "Because I thought pain meant weakness." She smiled softly. "And now?" I looked at her, steady and unafraid. "Now I know it means I was human. And sometimes, that realization is the real happy ending."